What is going on, Bucs fans, NCFP fans? Evan Wanish here, back at you with another video talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And today we are going to be going over the players to watch for week 2 of the preseason, this time against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. Now, the Buccaneers the past few days did have joint practices with the Jaguars, and Todd Bowles has come out and said that, look, it's going to be a lot similar than it was in Cincinnati, where the Buccaneers starters will most likely not play. Most, if not all, starters will probably not play, which honestly did surprise me a little bit. I did think we were probably going to see Baker Mayfield, maybe not for long, but I thought we were going to see Baker Mayfield or Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, a little bit of the offensive line, maybe a little bit of the defense. I thought we were going to see those guys. Seems like probably waiting until the third and final week of the preseason to do that, but we'll see. I wouldn't expect many starters out there, though. But with that gives a lot of guys who are not only fighting for roster spots, right, just spots on the team in general, but guys who are fighting for roles on this team. That gives them a really good opportunity, and for a second straight week, a really good opportunity. So with that being said, let's get right into the players to watch for week 2 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, week 2 of the preseason. Going to start off with two wide receivers, two very notable wide receivers who really weren't great this past week in Jacksonville with the joint practices, that being Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan. Both really dealt with some drops, especially Trey Palmer. So I think you'd want to see them make some plays on Saturday night. And I think that would be a welcome sign. You saw a little bit of that in Cincinnati. They did make some plays, but I would expect them to play a little bit more. And I would hope that they would be able to shake off, right, the rough 2 days of joint practices that they had and be able to bounce back and play well. So while it's not, the small names, right, pulling them out of a hat, Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan, we've talked about them plenty, right, throughout this entire process. But I still do think it's important for them to have a nice bounce back performance after a rough week of practice. So, and especially for McMillan, who hasn't really experienced that much at all, hasn't really experienced much disappointment in the practices. So I think that's pretty important. Moving on to the tight end room, I'm going to say Devin Culp, the 7th-round pick out of Washington. He impressed me in training camp. He impressed me with what I saw out of him in camp. Didn't really make too much of an impact on last Saturday night against Cincinnati, but I would expect him to get a little more playing time this time, especially with Payne Durham a little bit banged up. So I think Devin Culp could make a name for himself here. I think he could be able to step up and make a few plays, and I think he's sort of battling for one of those final tight end spots, right? I think it'd be maybe him and a guy like O'Keefe, maybe. So I think if Culp is able to show off his receiving ability, which is sort of his strong suit, I think that would go a long way in securing his roster spot. But we'll have to wait and see what the Buccaneers do with Devin Culp in terms of how much they play him on Saturday night, when he's playing, right? That matters too. Like, are you going to have Kyle Trask thrown to you? Or are you going to have John Wolford thrown to you? So that is pretty important, as well. Obviously, going to be keeping an eye on Graham Barton. Had a solid game, right, against Cincinnati. I would be looking forward to another solid game, right? And I don't want to keep mentioning the biggest names and stuff like that, but before we transition over to the defense, I did want to just give a quick shout out to Graham Barton, who I am hopeful that he can, come back with another pretty strong performance here and make the Bucs, look wise. It's still early, but make the Buccaneers look wise for picking him in the spot that they did. So I am very curious to see that. Moving on to the defense, I'm going to go with an inside linebacker, and it is actually Kalen DeLoach, the undrafted free agent out of Florida State. With the starters most likely not playing, you probably won't see any Levante David. You did see KJ Britt last week a little bit. You saw KJ Britt for a very short portion on Saturday night. I think he played the first drive of the game, and then that was it. So I do wonder if you see that again. If not, though, it could mean even more playing time for a guy like DeLoach, who figures to get a lot of playing time in these types of games. And he's a guy that, again, is sort of battling for one of those final linebacker spots. So I know there was a lot of people, mostly because of the Florida State thing, right? I get that connection, but there was a lot of people that were hopeful and optimistic about Kalen DeLoach heading into camp, saying, this guy could be a sleeper. This guy could be somebody who could make a name for himself and step up and sort of come out of nowhere, right? So I think it'd be pretty nice to see him with a pretty nice performance against Jacksonville. I think it would be pretty cool, and it would be something to where you're looking at it and saying, wow, the linebacker depth here makes you feel a little bit better, right? If a guy like Deloach is showing out, because look, KJ Britt is unproven. Servassier Dennis is unproven, and Kalen Deloach is undrafted free agent. So there's not really a ton there behind Levante David. So I think it'd be nice if Kalen Deloach, stepped up in this game and was able to make a couple of plays. So he's definitely a player that I'm going to be having my eye on. The last player that I'm going to mention had a nice game in Cincinnati and then followed up with a couple of nice practices this past week. It's Keenan Isaac. Keenan Isaac, the undrafted corner from last year out of Alabama State, I Bleav. Keenan Isaac made the team last year out of training camp, so he has done this before, right? He's done this song and dance before where you're battling for a spot, and he showed out on Saturday night, picked off a ball against the Bengals on a deep ball, made a pretty nice play on it. And then also, I Bleav in the Monday practice, I think they practiced on Monday, he picked off Baker Mayfield. So he really had a pretty nice weekend there, and I think he's hoping to do another one here. And I think it'd go a long way in determining, who sort of grabs those final couple of spots in the defensive back room, because we've talked a lot about the versatility that a lot of the Bucs defenders have, especially in the secondary, and sort of what they have in terms of corners and safeties. And I think Isaac is sort of one of those guys that is going to be at the bottom of that list, but he could be there. And like I said, he's already done this once before. He's impressed in training camp enough. He's impressed in the preseason enough last year to earn a roster spot, right? He made the 53-man roster. So I'm curious to see if Isaac can get a repeat performance out of him on Saturday night against Jacksonville that he did last Saturday against Cincinnati. So I am curious to see. One more that just came to my mind because he was all over the field, especially early on in the game on last Saturday against Cincinnati, was Kayvon Merriweather, who is another guy a lot like Keenan Isaac, who made the roster out of training camp last year as an undrafted free agent. So he knows what it's like to be battling for these spots. There's a lot of spots in the Buccaneers secondary that are already filled, right? With guys like Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, Tyke Smith, Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Bryce Hall, but there's a lot of spots that are open too. There's a lot of spots that are up for grabs and a lot of roles, depth roles that are up for grabs. So I think Kayvon Merriweather, if he continues to play like he did in Cincinnati, especially early, I think you could be hearing a lot more about him in the coming weeks as well. So, but I'm always curious to hear, who do you guys have your eyes on? Is there anybody in particular that I didn't mention? Do you agree with my list? I'm always curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that, but let me know in the comment section below. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go Bucs.